Unit 3, this is technically number 4. We're going to debate the Ratification Compromise. We've already gone over the Great Compromise and the 3/5 Compromise, but I will go back over those in a second. We are replacing the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution. In order to get the Constitution approved, there's 3 major compromises that must take place. And once those compromises are reached, we'll have a Constitution and we'll be able to throw out the Articles of Confederation. Why are we throwing it out? Well, it was the first form of national government. It really only set up a legislative branch, powerful state governments, weak national government. And when you had a weak national government, the government couldn't tax, the government couldn't enforce the laws, the government didn't have a president or a common currency. What else were some of the issues? Well, the way that the power was divided was not equal. We already talked about this in the last video with the Great Compromise, but under the Articles of Confederation, all states straight up had equal power. Rhode Island, despite having many fewer people than Virginia, North Carolina, or New York, had the same amount of power in Congress. Didn't make any sense whatsoever. Also, it was very difficult to pass laws based on 2/3 vote. Very hard to get the entire nation to agree. You might say, well, it's only 9 states. Yes, but remember, Northern, Southern, and the mid-colonies were very different at that time. So we'll get rid of the Articles of Confederation. We'll replace it with a new government. Constitutional Convention will meet, and it'll be based on Madison's beliefs. Remember, social studies games.net, social studies games.net. And then you'll find the study guide, review games, PowerPoints, activities, everything you need is there. More than Madison's beliefs, Rousseau's beliefs, other enlightened thinkers. It's all there, so check it out. The biggest thing was getting these different states to agree on a compromise. I'm not going to go completely over all these. You've already saw this in the last video. Big states versus the small population states, and that was the Great Compromise. So we set up a legislative branch, which will be based on population. That favors the big population states. But in this bicameral legislation, we also have a Senate, which gives power to the small population states. That's the Great Compromise. The 3/5 Compromise, one of the more nefarious, odious compromises in our history. It does not solve the issue of slavery, and some often criticize the 3/5 Compromise as the government outright not addressing what needed to be addressed, like getting rid of the immoral, and unethical practice of human bondage. Our government leaders did not do that. If you want to criticize them for such, then you are right to do so. You also need to understand why they did not. It's more than this video will go into, but obviously there's a reason why they did not address the issue of slavery. Was it because they were outright racist? It could possibly be, but it could also be that they had to reach certain compromises to create a nation. Otherwise, the nation would have never existed. That does not justify what they did. It does not immune them from being attacked or give them impunity for their actions, but we can understand the nuance and the complexity. It is not as simple as you want it to be. So the 3/5 Compromise will ultimately be a compromise where the southern states are allowed to count 3 out of every 5 slaves towards their population, and that will lead to more power in Congress. They will also be taxed for 3 out of every 5 of their slaves. It's just a compromise between the North and the South to get the country moving. And we'll save that further. All right. So where we left off, ratification, that means to approve. The U.S. Constitution must be approved. So we got the 3/5 Compromise. We've got the Great Compromise out of the way. Well, now we've got the Ratification Compromise. The Federalists argue that we need a strong federal government to protect the citizens and the nation. They are Madison, the guy who designed the Constitution, intentionally designed a strong federal government based on what we saw did not work with the Articles of Confederation. Articles of Confederation was too limited. So we need to give power to the federal government. And so the Constitution, the blueprint for our government, gives a lot of power to the federal government. The Anti-Federalists, many of these Southern representatives, say this Constitution, this framework, this blueprint is too strong. It gives too much power to the federal government. It takes too much power away from the states, which they had under the Articles of Confederation, and then gives it to a central federal government that is scarily like a king. So the Federalists want the federal government to be able to write laws, whereas the Anti-Federalists believe, no, we should leave a lot of the lawmaking and rulemaking up to the individual states to rule their own states. So Federalists versus Anti-Federalists, how do we reach a compromise and bring these two together? This is going to be the Ratification Compromise. Remember, the Anti-Federalists, Patrick Henry, George Mason, John Adams. States should be able to do their own thing, make their own rules. They don't really like the idea of the Constitution. Whereas the Federalists, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay will say, they're going to argue, right? And they're going to defend their point. Imagine that, a world where you had to research and provide evidence to defend your point, to persuade your opponents, to see things from your point of view, to reach a compromise. You don't just yell at people. They make an argument to the American people. Here's this Constitution. We're not going to make you sign it. What we're going to do is articulate our key points to try to persuade you to see things from our point of view so that we can come together. We're going to help you see what we see, and we can meet in the middle. And that will be the Federalist Papers. The Articles of Confederation was a disaster. The federal government must be strong. We already talked about it in video 1. Some powers will be given to states. We're not saying it's going to be a complete king in the central government. We're going to give some powers to the states. It's going to be all right. We're going to have federalism. We talked about this in video 2. A division of power between the national and state government. There's going to be jobs for the federal government, and there will still be states, or there'll still be powers and roles and responsibilities for the state government. That's federalism. It's not just going to be all federal. We're going to mix it up. That's what the Federalists argue. Well, the Anti-Federalists say, I'm not buying it. It's not good enough. A strong central government might become a king. We don't want an abusive, oppressive power ruling over the entire nation. We need some sovereignty. We need some autonomy. We need our own state to be able to rule our own people. We don't want New York bossing around Virginia. And we don't want Georgia bossing around Massachusetts. So we'll reach a compromise. How will they do this? We promise we will not have a king. We promise we're not going to violate your rights. And we'll put it in writing, a contract, if you will. And this contract will be the Bill of Rights. So the Federalists will say to the Anti-Federalists, we get it. We Federalists understand you Anti-Federalists. We understand you're worried. We know that a strong federal government might have too much power. And with that power, it might abuse the citizens and take the citizens' rights away, just like a king. So we're going to make sure that that can never, ever happen. If you agree to sign the Constitution and you agree to give the federal government power, we're going to put a safety valve. We're going to put a check in place, and it's going to be called the Bill of Rights. We're going to take the Constitution, we're going to add 10 things to it. And those 10 amendments are going to be called the Bill of Rights, and they're going to specifically protect the rights and specifically let the Anti-Federalists know that you're going to be safe. There is no way possible for the government to abuse you and take your rights away because we're putting it in the Constitution. So the same document that sets up a strong federal government also sets all these rules and restrictions on that federal government. Limited government. Say it with me, folks. Limited government. Not too limited like the Articles of Confederation, but it's in there, and it's still in there today, and it's the only thing saving you from day to day from an oppressive, abusive government. And at times, it seems like it might not be here much longer. Anyway, so the Bill of Rights, first 10 amendments of the Constitution, designed by the Federalists to appease the Anti-Federalists. Government will protect specific rights. Religion, assembly, press, petition, speech, bearers. You can have the right to bear arms, no quartering, privacy, double jeopardy. We'll go into all these when we get into the Constitution a little bit later. But okay, all right. Anti-Federalists like, I like that. Good. All right, we will sign your Constitution. We will give more power to the federal government because we know that even if they go too far, they still can't go this far. And we'll take it. There's the Bill of Rights. And so they reach a compromise. Everything working out. Awesome. Last thing, the Judiciary Act of 1789 and the Constitution, they don't really explain the Judicial Branch. Whoops, we completely forgot about it. We're doing all these compromises and arguing about slavery, and we never got around to dealing with the courts. So soon after the Constitution is signed in 1787, Judiciary Act of 1789 will come about that court thing we forgot. So we'll set up 3 federal courts, U.S. district courts, which are located all throughout the country. This is where most of the court cases will appear. Most of the crimes, most of the civil cases between people that are not small local issues, those will go to district court. Then there'll be a circuit court of appeals where if you don't like your decision in the circuit court, you can appeal it up. And then last is the Supreme Court. This is the final appeals court, and this is also the court that will deal with judicial constitutional matters. Really big stuff. Very few things end up in the Supreme Court. Most of it's going to be in the district court. They don't really deal with someone breaking the law. They deal with issues concerning the Constitution and appeals that often concern the Constitution. And this is all cleared up by the Judiciary Act of 1789. So hopefully you'll at least be able to remember or understand, the Great Compromise. That was about big population states and small population states. 3/5 Compromise. That was about slavery and how the pro-slavery states and anti-slavery states are really just the states that didn't have slaves as much. How are we going to balance power? And then Ratification Compromises. Big federal government people versus the small government people. How did they work out that compromise? If you can analyze and evaluate, you can really criticize and maybe see some of the problems with these compromises. All right, we are rocking and rolling. I'll see you in the next video, and we're going to start to talk about the Constitution, the preamble, the articles, the amendments, and then we're going to go and start expanding the country, and we're going to do all kinds of stuff. Hip, hip, hooray.